Welcome back to another episode of Bill and Kipp's Excellent Bible Adventure as we look at the Gospel of John. I'm Bill Brunson, one of the pastors here at Vestavia Hills Methodist Church.
And I'm Kipp McClurg, and I'm also a pastor here. And it's a joy to get to look at today the person of John the Baptist.
That's right. And I see that today we have not one, but two props to lead us on our way.
Our budget for props has doubled, and so we have so much more to give. So our first prop we'll talk about toward the end, but it's an hourglass. And, of course, it has sand in it. It's a black sand hourglass. And as you know, the gravity pulls that down, and over a period of time, hopefully about an hour, it goes all the way to the bottom. And our second prop, you've probably noticed it too. It's a red stool.
It's a stool.
1950s version, did not cost extra. And you'll notice it's kind of empty.
It is. So does this mean that since it's a 50s theme, are we getting a guest star, and is that guest star Henry Winkler as the Fonz?
That would be a good guess, and it would be a nice guest to have.
It'd be a great guest to have.
I like Henry Winkler. Maybe he can join us at some point.
Let's hope.
But it's actually going to be someone that comes or is expected at a lot of dinners, but doesn't always show up, and that would be Elijah. And so we'll talk a little bit more about both of those, about the Elijah chair and about the hourglass as we get to talk more about John the Baptist.
And if we have time, we'll talk about Henry Winkler too.
That's right. We will.
All right.
So John is the other John mentioned in the book of John. And he actually shows up in all four of the Gospels. He's sort of this odd figure who likes to eat locusts and wild honey and wears camel hair. Apparently not a coat necessarily with buttons, but just camel hair and I think maybe a belt.
Yeah, leather belt.
Yeah. And so tell us a little bit more about Brother John.
Well, John the Baptist is the son of Elizabeth and Zachariah, who Elizabeth is the cousin of Mary, the mother of Jesus. So John would be the cousin of Jesus, about 6 months older than Jesus. And he is living probably in and around the Qumran community, in the Essene community, down below Jericho.
So they would kind of get together at holidays, play football or something like that. Kind of be that extended family you see every now and then.
Yeah, and so I mean, you can imagine when Mary and Jesus looking out, and here comes John coming to whatever holiday it might be, and you have to wonder how much he stuck out at these family gatherings, especially while they're eating the normal food. And John was eating locust and wild honey. Now, the honey he was probably eating in the region he was living, it probably wasn't bee honey. More than likely, it was date honey, because they have a large number of date trees that grow in that area. They still make date honey in that area.
So it's sort of a sugar extract, then, I guess that
it is. It is, and
okay.
It tastes wonderful. And then the locust he ate wasn't that he was eating bugs.
Oh,
yeah. When I was growing up, always worried about that.
Yeah. Well,
I never understood eating bugs, and so I thought that was strange.
It always reminded me of my cousin that ate bugs, and I thought Jesus and I had something in common.
No, not on this level, because what John was doing, he was eating the seeds from the pod that grew on the carob tree. And the reason they called it locust was when the pods would hang in the tree, when they would get ripe, when the seeds would be ready to be, you'd go through and harvest it out, they would dry on the tree. And when the wind blew, it sounded like a swarm of locusts coming, sort of like that 7-year locust sound. And that's the noise they made.
Rattle, rumble kind of
thing. And they still eat these because you can use it, you can grind it up and use it as a chocolate substitute in things because it has that semi-sweet flavor. And so John wasn't actually odd for eating that.
That's strange as stuff.
No, not at all.
So he was odd in that little bit of what he ate, but also he lived really where no one else lived, in the wilderness. And it says in Bethany, the other side of Jordan, is where they met him on their baptism. So let's look at a couple of maps. The first one is of the upper part of Israel. And Israel, down, I don't know if it's probably closer to the border of Israel,
right.
Is this Rift Valley that is filled with the Sea of Galilee and then the Jordan River. And then if you go past that, you get to the Dead Sea. But this is the area of the upper around what they call the Galilee.
Right.
And so
And
a lot
Jesus
of what
grew up
happened
here
there.
in Nazareth, and then it's to give you an understanding of distance, from Nazareth to Capernaum is about 20 miles.
Okay.
It's about 20 miles, and all of this is still, all around the Sea of Galilee is still in the current nation of Israel. But when you go down through the country, eventually you get to the point where anything on the that side of the Jordan is the country of Jordan.
Mm-hmm. So that's
and
the
so
border
it becomes, the Jordan River becomes the border at some point lower. But all of this region would have been where Jesus does much of his ministry once he gets started. Though first he starts off his ministry by going south and going down to the wilderness where his cousin John was doing ministry.
So so John would have been south of here, and so we're going to kind of move south. There's the Jordan River emptying into the Dead Sea, and this is, if I remember right, about 1,800 feet or so below sea level. Right. Almost a moonscape, sort of odd with the really thick water that you can't sink in. And
oh, absolutely, yeah. It's very dense mineral water, and so you don't really sink. You can just sit there and lay there and float in it. Very interesting, and this whole area is very desolate, all the way down to Masada, which is Herod the Great's fortress that he built and became one of the last strongholds in the Jewish revolt later on in history. Ein Gedi is an oasis that is along the Dead Sea. David actually fled from Saul and hid in Ein Gedi. You can still go to the Ein Gedi oasis. But John was up in the Qumran area, and in that, just north of there is Jericho. And so you see Jerusalem and Qumran and the Jordan River. All of this area from Jerusalem, which is on a hill, mm-hmm. which is built on, well, actually the city of Jerusalem is built on 7 hills. And so you have the hills of Jerusalem. You're going down, down, down. As you follow the Jericho road going to Jericho, we know Jesus tells the story about the man on the Jericho road. The problem with the Jericho road is it's going through the Judean wilderness where it is desolate. It is all rock, and it is all dangerous, and nothing lives out there.
Yeah, and the story, remember the story of the road to Jericho and the robbers, and it's barren and people can hide. And there was a kind of a sense, too, that kind of the demons lived out in the wilderness.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, when in the Old Testament, they would set the scapegoat and put the sins of the people in scapegoat, and it would go out into the wilderness. And so good things didn't really happen out in the wilderness.
No.
And so, but that's where John was.
That's where John is.
And that's where we find him, as mm-hmm. he is there and then baptizing on the Jordan River there. Now, when they come to him, many are asking him, "Are you Elijah?" And it's a pretty good question. We have the Elijah chair, and we're waiting for Elijah and hoping Elijah will join.
That's right.
That's pretty common practice in Jewish families. So tell us
absolutely.
A little bit about that.
Every year during Passover, when the Jewish family celebrates the Seder meal, they have the Elijah chair at the Seder meal with the anticipation. They will actually go to the door and open the door to see if the prophet Elijah has appeared, to announce that was the year when the Messiah would come and that Israel would be redeemed, and they would be back in Jerusalem and back in be able to rebuild a temple and all of that. So they have the Elijah chair still today at the Seder meal. But every time a little boy is born into the Jewish faith, and they go to the bris when the child is 8 days old and it's time for his circumcision, they always have the Elijah chair there, because it's the belief that a prophet will appear. The prophet, according to the Jewish belief, Elijah, will appear if the child that is being dedicated that day is Messiah. If Messiah is there, if they're circumcising Messiah and bringing him into the covenant of Moses, then it is Elijah's role to appear and declare that it's time for Messiah.
Wow. So John's saying, I'm not that person.
Right.
I am declaring that something pretty big's coming, but I'm not that person.
He's not the reincarnation of Elijah.
Right. Right.
He's John.
And they're explaining in Malachi, kind of toward the end of the Old Testament, there's this sort of prophetic statement: "I will send the prophet Elijah to you before that great and dreadful day of the Lord comes. He will turn the hearts of parents to their children and the hearts of children to their parents, or else I will come and strike the land with total destruction. And so there's this sense that when Elijah shows up, big things are going to happen.
Right.
And John's saying, I'm not that person, but I am foretelling that something's about to happen. And then one of the disciples whom Jesus is calling uses a term that shows up that we have to be prepared for. This is the Christ. Mm-hmm. And we're used to that word. We call Jesus Christ. Sometimes we think that's his last name. Right. But it's not.
It wasn't Joseph Christ, Mary Christ,
right,
and so
right.
Jesus Christ. No,
it wasn't that.
That wasn't it.
And so the word is as you probably know, is a Greek word, and it means anointed. And the Hebraic word that would be equivalent would be from the word Messiah.
Right.
And so because they're anointed, and the whole concept of anointing goes back to Samuel in the Old Testament, who anointed the kings of Israel. And so there's this sense of the kingship of Israel, and ultimately God's anointed person to be leading. That idea is encapsulated in the word Christ. And so for one of the disciples to say, this is Christ, this is the Messiah, pretty big moment.
It is a very big moment.
But the interesting thing about John is, to me, and this brings us back to our hourglass, is this phrase that we find later in John chapter 3. He says, the bride belongs to the bridegroom. The friend who attends the bridegroom waits and listens for him, and it is full of joy when he hears the bridegroom's voice. That joy is mine, and it is now complete. So he's saying, I'm not the bridegroom, but I'm a friend, and I hear his voice. And then, third, he says, he must become greater, and I must become less. At a spiritual level, I think what John says there is really what kind of needs to be a prayer for all of us.
Absolutely.
And somewhat like our hourglass, over time, the top becomes much less, and the bottom becomes much greater. And what humility John would have had to say, I'm not that person. And yet, I am preparing for, and I am going to be a partner with and announce the coming of the one who is to come.
Right, because when you look at the other gospel stories, when they talk about John the Baptist, they talk about the fact that people are going out to see John at the Jordan River to be baptized by him, to repent of their sins and be baptized by John in the Jordan. And it says that they're coming from everywhere. And they say that people from the temple are going out, that there are Pharisees going out. I mean, he is drawing a crowd. He is assembling disciples himself, people that are following him. The idea of being a disciple is not just saying that you like someone, but it's
not
saying,
a fan.
Oh no, it's not being a fan. It's saying I want to be just like them. And so he's drawing disciples to him, people that are saying, I want to be just like you. And the crowds are coming. And in the midst of all that, when John could be so full of ego and attitude, John says, he must become greater and I must become less. He understood the role that he was to play in launching the Messiah, but ultimately it was the Messiah. That was what was important, not him.
So I think for all of us, we preachers especially, but all of us who follow Jesus, as good things happen to us, we're always reminded that it's not really about us,
right?
But it's about Christ.
Absolutely.